Hello, I'm Kimberly Dondo, Digital Content Manager, and welcome to the In Conversation With series, a series where I speak to notable figures in the realm of financial services. Listen as they share their personal journeys, thoughts on the industry, and advice for aspiring advisors. In today's episode, I'm joined by Tom Selby, Head of Retirement Policy at AJ Bell. So thanks for joining me today, Tom.
Hi, Kim. Thanks very much for having me on.
So Tom, can you give us a bit more of a background for those who might not know you, about how you got started in financial services?
Yeah, sure. So I'm sure there's plenty of people listening who won't know who I am. So yeah, my name is Tom Selby, Head of Retirement Policy at AJ Bell, as you said. So my background and my introduction to financial services was actually through money marketing. So I went straight from university into trade journalism. So I was a reporter at Professional Pensions magazine initially for a year, and then I joined money marketing, I think in 2009 or 2010, where I was specialising in pensions, and then became news editor a few years later. And then in, I believe, 2016, I joined AJ Bell as a senior analyst, and I've been working for AJ Bell ever since. So partly leading our kind of external communications on pensions and retirement issues, and partly more recently engaging and liaising with policymakers in government and regulators to hopefully try to get some sensible retirement policy through, and to make sure that new changes coming down the track aren't too painful for savers. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to hear you make the shift from kind of journo to working within pensions and policy making, which is very cool. But I know that before we discussed a little bit about finfluencers before we started recording, and that is kind of the basis of this podcast today. And I know that you said that you don't quite understand this space, but I would consider you a minor finfluencer of some sort, in terms of like your Twitter following and your engagement on Twitter, with brands and stuff like that they tend to look at influencers for people who get the most engagement and stuff. And your posts do generate engagement. The articles that you've written for us also generate engagement as well. So I feel like you do have kind of a background within that. And I wanted to talk about this because it's something that I have found quite interesting over the last couple of months, because there's been a lot of talk about how there needs to be regulation for financial influencers. I wrote something recently about, if you go on TikTok, there's under the investment hashtag or financial education hashtag, there's billions of views there. So there's people going to these places to get information, whether it's good or bad. That is that's up for debate, I guess. But what are your thoughts on whether the whole debate around regulation and finfluencers?
So firstly, thank you. I don't think anybody's ever described my move from trade journalism to a pensions company as cool. So I think
it's fascinating.
I'm going to pocket that for my CV and move on. I think, I agree. It is an interesting and incredibly fast-moving area of financial services. Where I'm not sure where I come down on it yet in terms of whether it's going to be a net good for financial services in the UK, for savers in the UK, and for investors in the UK, or a net bad. I think there are some fairly obvious things that would pop it in column A, so potentially being good, and a few fairly obvious things that would pop it in column B, so potentially being bad. If you think of the column A part, so you mentioned the number of views that a lot of these posts will get. So the reach of social media is incredible and almost infinite. You can have posts, you have people on social media, as you say, on TikTok, on Twitter, on other platforms, who are potentially getting millions of views, certainly tens of thousands of views on what can often be dry subjects like pensions and investing and things like that. And if that can be harnessed in a way that encourages people to make better decisions about their finances, better informed decisions about their finances, then I think that could be a really good thing. And I'm thinking there about people, obviously, like financial advisors, like people who read money marketing, but also people like Martin Lewis. So you look at Martin Lewis and he's got an ITV show that has millions of people watching. That's found a way to engage people in their finances and help them make better decisions through guidance. And so if social media can be used to achieve those aims, it can potentially be a good thing. However, in the column B part, the potential risks here, it's fairly obvious that at the moment this is an entirely unregulated Wild West kind of world. You've essentially got lots of people who may or may not know a huge amount about what they're talking about or promoting, not always being absolutely clear about what they're talking about or what they're promoting or why they're doing it, potentially trying to either coax people down a road that might not be in their best interests. If you think of the worst case scenario, possibly trying to flog scam type investments to people, which we've seen plenty of, unfortunately, through social media, particularly in the last few years. Clearly, if that's what becomes the dominant narrative around social media, then it's potentially a bad thing. And you've got a regulator sat in the middle trying to figure out how all this works. And you've got to remember that in terms of how quickly social media has taken off, and some of those platforms that things like TikTok, that's a nation platform. I think it's only really, to my mind, been a thing in the social conscience for maybe a couple of years, 3 years or something like that. And the regulator is, in essence, is kind of sprinting to stand still with this kind of stuff. And frankly, I think a lot of people across the industry are sprinting to stand still as well. And I'd include myself in that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, as someone who you've talked about how you are speaking with, in terms of creating policies, well, mostly to do with pensions, do you have any idea or any opinion about how regulation could be enforced upon these platforms or the potential financial influences that are on these platforms?
Yeah, with great difficulty, I think is the honest answer. And I think what we saw from the FCA recently, I think it was a couple of weeks ago now, where it was the FCA was saying it was engaging with the Advertising Standards Agency to try to provide more information to social media influencers to make sure that they're not flouting existing regulations, which might be the case, but B, if they fall outside of those regulations, so for example, an unregulated social media influencer promoting an unregulated product or something unregulated, or giving information in an unregulated environment, that they make sure that they're doing it in a way which doesn't risk harming those individuals. Now, I think that's a good initiative from the regulator. It's a good way to do it, but it also kind of sums up the challenge there, in that because you've got so many people, potentially anybody around the world on social media, who could at any point in time say something or post something which may or may not be deemed a financial promotion or may not be deemed financial advice. And many of those people won't even be aware of financial advice regulations. And many of those people won't even be providing that information or that advice, if it strays into advice, in the UK at all. Then if you're the FCA, and indeed even if you're the UK government, then there's only really so much you can do. Now, we've got the online safety bill going through Parliament. That's potentially going to put more emphasis on the roles of social media platforms in policing the information that goes through there. Now, a lot of that is specifically looking at things like scam advertising. So at the moment, you can have scam adverts that will be paid for on social media platforms that wouldn't have been captured by that early form of that online safety bill. My understanding is that the intention is that they will be captured by the online safety bill. So you're starting to get to a world where legislation is trying to put more responsibility on social media platforms. But of course, these are social media platforms that have international scope, and the individual users of those social media platforms, some of what they do will be well known to those platforms, but some of it won't be particularly well known to those platforms. And when, as I say, when you think of millions of people using TikTok, for example, and posting videos possibly constantly, then to kind of keep track of all that and make sure that where new people start to potentially post dangerous or misleading information, they're caught and stopped is challenging. Now, I'm sure there's more that those companies can do to regulate themselves, but it's probably going to require an international regulatory effort to hold them to account.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think it's very difficult especially when it comes to the internet. Regulating anything is probably very difficult. But I just wondered, just a random aside, on your thoughts on, you work in kind of on the communication side at AJ Bell. Has there ever been a point where you've considered using one of these financial influencers with a great following? I mean, obviously you have your own mascot that has its own following. But is that anything, do you think that might be something that AJ Bell or companies similar to yourselves might do in the future?
So I'm sure it is something that all companies will look at some point or another. If you look, it feels slightly old school to say this now, but if you look at podcasts, for example, so you have plenty of financial services advertising is done through podcasters and things like that. I think that, and in terms of using, I guess an influencer, it's just another platform to potentially promote information and your services to people. So it wouldn't be surprising to see financial services companies using the right type. If there's an influencer who has the same that's aligned with their brand dynamics and all the rest of it, then clearly you're going to get advertising going down that route. I think that makes perfect sense. And that's just where we are in 2023. It's a brave new world, and as I said at the start, it's something that I'm having to run to catch up with as well. But that makes sense. I think from a firm perspective, I think the real danger here in terms of financial services influencers or finfluencers isn't with regards to highly regulated FCA companies promoting their services through an influencer where there'll be huge due diligence. If, for example, AJ Bell were to have some advertising with a financial services influencer, that would go through a whole compliance process. We as a regulated company would take our duties in terms of the message that goes out there incredibly seriously, and we'd make sure that we knew exactly what was being said, how it was being said, and that it didn't cross any regulatory lines into financial advice, for example. Whereas if you consider, a brand new cryptocurrency which is unregulated, potentially being promoted by an influencer who might not be familiar with any of these regulations whatsoever, then I think that's where you get the real danger, not just to consumers, but to, I guess, the reputation of investing and saving more broadly. I think one of the big dangers here is that you have lots of money coming from something like cryptocurrency towards people who have lots of influence, but potentially not a great understanding of what it is they're talking about and promoting. It ends in a disaster, and we've obviously seen already some scams promoted through influencers and things like that, which have obviously ended in lots of people losing money. And what you end up with is people losing trust in financial services generally, and thinking that generally it doesn't make sense for me to invest my money or to save my money anywhere, because they think that there's the same level of risk associated if you're investing in a single cryptocurrency that's been hawked to you by a social media influencer as there is going through a regulated company and getting a basket of funds and dealing with a regulated advisor. So big risks, I think, there. But as I said at the top as well, I think there are some positives that can be drawn out of this. It's just that challenge of dealing with some of the more nefarious parts of the social media world.
Yeah. And kind of piggybacking off your point about compliance, when I had written my article about the need for financial advisors and people within financial services to step up and become finfluencers themselves, someone did raise the point of compliance and say, if they were to, they were asking me, and I was like, I have no idea. If they were to, start promoting on whether it's LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok or Twitter, if they were to start, writing little posts or putting videos out, giving some form of financial education, what regulation and what compliance they might need to go through to do so. And I think I hadn't taken that into consideration, that there are kind of barriers when it comes to professionals in stepping into this field, that someone like me who doesn't have all the certifications, I can just start saying stuff that I've heard you say to me and put it on TikTok and be like, I learned this today, but that is something that I think should be taken into consideration, maybe potentially.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. So I think there are two parts to this as far as I can see it. So I think the first part is what the FCA is trying to do with its work with the ASF, with the Advertising Standards Agency, in terms of trying to make sure as many social media influencers, those and people who are generally promoting either products through social media or ideas or giving information through social media, understand what their responsibilities are, and actually the fact that there are potentially tens of thousands of people who might take action based on the information that they give, and so to understand that they need to keep that information as accurate as possible. So that's part of it. But I think the other part of this is that to ensure that, I guess, the battle for engagement of people and the battle to get as much useful information and guidance to people as possible isn't dominated by people who don't understand what they're talking about, if that makes sense. So I think you've got the thing of trying to ensure that in the short term, people aren't giving dodgy information on social media. And then I think you've got the other challenge of trying to free up regulated companies and regulated individuals who can give useful information to people to be able to do so, obviously in a safe and regulated environment, but without the fear of putting information out there and some of the blockades that are in place at the moment, which can mean that people think it's just, there's no point whatsoever in going down the road of posting anything or writing anything or speaking to a customer that in a way that involves their personal circumstances. Now, the gold standard is always going to be getting regulated financial advice. AJ Bell as a company has historically always supported regulated financial advisors, and that's never going to change. But you're always going to have, we all know there's a huge advice gap in the UK. And for those who can afford to and are willing to pay for a financial advice, that's great. For the millions of people who either choose not to get financial advice or can't afford financial advice, the route is going to be guidance. And the question is whether we want them to get that guidance from regulated companies who know what they're talking about, or from the potential wild west of social media, where you've got people who might not have their best interests at heart and crucially aren't covered by regulation. So I think we've got a review of the advice guidance boundary about to kick off. I think as that review moves forward, and it's going, that review we're expecting to take years. It's not going to come up with a quick fix solution over the next couple of months. But the aim, what the central thing I think everyone has to have focused in their mind as that review goes forwards is this battle for engagement with people and ensuring that people are getting accurate information from the best possible sources, and those people who are regulated and who hopefully know what they're talking about and have customers' best interests at heart are able to communicate in a way that's as efficient as possible, rather than people turning to someone on TikTok who potentially doesn't have their best interests at heart, as I said, and perhaps doesn't have the most up-to-date and accurate information at hand either.
Yeah, those are very good points. So for someone who might be drawn to, who is in that category of those millions who, don't have the money to go and get regulated financial advice, what steps do you think they can take to mitigate the risks of, going out and doing their own research and listening to some of these people who might be saying, valid, helpful things, or those who might actually just have nefarious, intentions?
Yeah. So you've got a whole spectrum of people. I think there it's fair to say. So I think it's like whenever you, I don't, certainly from a personal perspective, whenever I read something on Twitter or I read something on Facebook or I watch a video and it's from a source that I don't know and that I therefore don't necessarily trust, then I wouldn't take as read that what they have said to me is absolutely true and accurate and fair. And so in terms of doing your own research, as you put it, if I received a piece of information or a suggestion from someone on TikTok or Twitter or Facebook or anywhere else, then I'd look to get that verified by a trusted source. Now, what would a trusted source be? So it could be something like Money Helper, for example, in the financial services space. So that's the guidance service provided by government. I think generally, if you're dealing with a regulated company, then you should be able to trust that the information that it's providing is accurate, because they'll have the FCA holding that company's feet to the fire in the way that an unregulated company might not be. And of course, for those who choose to and can afford to, then financial advisors offer a great way to kind of cut your way through this mud of misinformation and to understand what your financial options are. Now, clearly, that's not going to be an option for everyone. As I said, not everybody can afford financial advice, but for those who can, one of the many benefits of getting financial advice is being able to pick through what's true and what's not true, what's useful and what's not useful, and come up with a savings plan, an investing plan, a retirement plan that's based around your needs and your long-term financial goals, rather than being pulled left and right by different posts from different parts of the media saying you should invest in cryptocurrency over here, and then you should invest in this stock over here, and you should be taking these kind of risks. It can be quite a confusing world, I think, for people, and actually a financial advisor can help remove some of that complexity and help focus you in on exactly what you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve it. So there are lots of different resources out there. I think in terms of protecting yourself, I think the key in terms of when you're thinking of things like scams, it's a similar principle. So if you see an offer that's seems too good to be true, if somebody is promoting a cryptocurrency and says you've got guaranteed double-digit returns and you'll get those within a year or 2 years, then you should be incredibly skeptical about offers like that. And if you've got any doubt whatsoever, then obviously don't part with your money.
Yeah, I think I had this conversation before, and I think most people who kind of turn to cryptocurrencies, the problem is that they are people who want instant gratification, because we are in a society where we have instant gratification. So it's like, I want to be rich now. You tell me how to do that. That's literally some of the adverts that I see, is that, do you want to make 6 figures a month? now. And then it's sad. Some people do fall for that. Some people aren't skeptical.
It's an interesting thing as well. Certainly whenever, so I still, for my sins, play football on a Saturday afternoon, and that's quite an interesting place to end up talking about work, because when you play football, you've got people who from bin men to hedge fund managers to all the rest of it, all meet together after the game, and you have a few beers and you talk about things. And whenever my job comes up, I'd say the most common thing that I'm asked by people who take any sort of interest whatsoever in pensions and investing and things like that is, where should I invest my money to make the most money now? Which obviously is not something that I have the expertise to tell them about, and B, is completely the wrong way to approach this. You need to be focused on your long-term goals and having a balanced portfolio and taking risks that you're comfortable with and all the rest of it. But I think there remains this thing that people, I think, whether it's a behavioral thing, I'm not sure, but people want to be told, invest your money here and you will get this amount at the end of it. This is what will deliver you the highest returns. And of course, if anyone knew that, then they wouldn't be speaking to you about this stuff. If anyone on TikTok knew the next cryptocurrency that was going to deliver you 1,000% returns over the next 10 years, they wouldn't be telling you about it. They'd be investing it themselves.
Yeah. But I think also there is that perception that, there are people that do know those products that will give them quick returns. It's just like some hush secret high society thing that's being hidden from the everyday man. And I think that's maybe part of people's perception of why they think that investment is can be a short-term return, because there are some success stories that are like that.
I think the other thing I'd say, particularly when it comes to people promoting investments, is anyone who claims to have any degree of certainty about what the future holds, I would say is a huge red flag always. So whenever someone is promising a guaranteed return, whenever somebody says this, investment X or cryptocurrency Y is guaranteed to be the next big thing, that should immediately set off alarm bells in your head, because anyone who has that kind of confidence is most likely a shyster who's trying to flog you something which is either doesn't exist or is almost guaranteed to end up making you a big loss or earning them huge fees over the short term.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would say that the same thing. And especially because I think even Warren Buffett has said, he has no idea where things might go. Yeah. So if someone like him, who has been so prolific and so successful, doesn't know, then I think you should listen. But finally, what are your thoughts on the long-term implications of the rise of influencers? Because like you said, the idea of regulating them and even regulating the platforms that people use seems very difficult, because it has to be an international thing. So first of all, every country has to come into agreement, which from history is pretty impossible. So what do you think will happen in the future?
It's a really good question. I don't know the answer, in all honesty. So it feels to me like this. Everything in terms of what's happening, the proliferation of social media, clearly not a brand new thing, but the speed with which it's developed, particularly over the last few years, is quite frightening. I think. I think there are. As I mentioned at the top, there is the possibility that this will develop in a way which can help promote positive behaviours if you look at the reach of the communication and all the rest of it. But my worry is that if regulators and governments aren't able to get on top of this, and this is the challenge, as you say, is that you're effectively trying to regulate the world. You've got social media is the equivalent of Speaker's Corner, except anybody can speak to anybody around the world, and you've got regulators with finite resources desperately trying to cover everything all at once, and anybody on Twitter or on TikTok could go from posting something completely inane and benign to recommending a specific financial product. And the idea that any single regulator or even global alliance of regulators could stay on top of that, to me feels slightly impossible. So with those opportunities in mind, I am fearful that unless in some way regulators and governments are able to get on top of this, that the financial influencers who possibly don't have savers and investors' best interests in mind may win the engagement battle, and will end up with more bad news stories of people losing their pensions or making bad decisions based on a recommendation from someone on TikTok or Twitter, or has been scammed because of this. I think we're going to see more of that in the coming years as regulators and governments try to get to grips with it. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope that there's a more positive future and a more positive role for finfluencers out there, and I can see a situation where that becomes the case, but it's challenging at the moment, and it's a question of whether or not those people who have influence are using it in a sensible and a compassionate way, or if they're using it just to line their own pockets.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think the latter is usually the case. But we can always be hopeful and hope for the best for the future. And then also hope that people are getting education themselves or seeing the warnings. I've seen, the FCA putting out warnings about not gambling, not playing with your money like it's a game or something like that. So hopefully those kind of advertisements are also, effective as well.
And we all have a role to play in that as well, from people like me who go out there and communicate, to people, journalists at Money Marketing, to journalists at national newspapers and others. There's like I say, there is, I think, the dark, in terms of focus purely on social media, I worry about that dark side of it dominating and leading to people getting misinformation. But the other side of that, of course, is that people seem to be more interested in their finances than ever before. And I think the big challenge for everyone, for government, for regulators, for everyone, is to make sure that where people are receiving financial information, more often than not, it's from people who they can trust and from sources that they can trust, and it's information that can actually help them make good decisions. And I think that's the real battleground now. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today, Tom. I really found this conversation fascinating. Like I said, it's something that I'm passionate about. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to In Conversation With. We do hope that you enjoyed it. Please do keep up to date with all our new releases via Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you get your podcasts from. You can also keep up to date with all our new content published on the Money Marketing website, as well as our print edition Money Marketing magazine. So make sure to subscribe. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. See you next time.